أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأزواجهم اللهم كل وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل الساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Can someone remember what was last week's?
Rainwater.
Yes,
So
great. Ahsantum. We mentioned rainwater and we mentioned jari water. Who can tell me how many types of waters we had? Ahsant. Okay. Two types of water, Ahsantum. Mudhaf and absolute. Mutlaq we call it. Okay, so mudhaf and absolute. The one that's absolute has 5 types. 5 categories, 5 types, okay. But the main category was mudhaf and mutlaq or absolute. And we defined what's mudhaf. Who can remember what's mudhaf?
the water is mixed.
It's mixed with something
Some
or
impurity.
or derived, extracted from something.
So juices.
Okay, ahsantum. Mixed with something to an extent they don't call it water anymore. It has to be considered water. Absolute water or just water without any description additions, okay? So mudhaf, we mentioned the meaning, the literal meaning is something added to it, additives with additions. So the water that's absolute could purify. And the water that's not absolute, we are going to be mentioning the ahkam of it inshallah today, and inshallah after it, if time allows us, we're going to mention the ahkam of basically one relieving themselves. So can you please read matter 59?
Matter 59. Mixed mudaf water, the meaning of which was mentioned in matter 26, does not purify an impure thing in wudu and ghusl with it are invalid.
Ahsantum. So we said something that's no longer called water is mudaf, okay? So I can't do wudu with it, I can't do ghusl with it. Basically it's useless in matters of purifying in the laws of Islam. Number 60, please.
Matter 60. Chlorine gas has that is added to water for disinfection, and sometimes changes the color of the water and makes it white. But if the water remains in a container for a few moments, it becomes clear and colorless again. Does not cause the water to become mixed water, so mudaf. And it's not necessary to wait until the water becomes clear and colorless.
So you must have seen these chlorine powder they add to disinfect the water. At the beginning it's a bit foggy, and then when it sits for a while it becomes clear, crystal clear again. So the Sayyid says because adding this chlorine to the water doesn't take it away from being considered water. Remember we said the criteria for a water to become mudaf was what? It's no longer called water. Sometimes a slump, it's so dirty, no one calls it water anymore, they call it dirt. So if a water is mixed with chlorine, do people still call it water? Yes. The water in our tap, it has chlorine in it, very small amount, that's why it's not suggested to drink. So the Sayyid says, if you have your own pool and you mix chlorine with it to disinfect it, you don't have to wait for it to become clear, even though if it's still foggy, because it's considered water. See, we're going to that, back to the urf, common perception. Because it's considered water, it's still absolute. It's not mudaf. These titles, we call it in fiqh, we call it unvan. When a title is applied to something, certain laws are followed by it. This is why it's really important to know what title applies on what, then what law follows by it. So if a water is absolute, the laws of absolute water, meaning purification, follows by it. If a water is considered mudaf, there is no law of purification following it. So, number 61, mudaf water.
Matter 61. Mudhaf water, even if it is core is in amount, becomes impure if even a tiny amount of impurity, najasa, reaches it.
Ahsantum. So, remember when we said about absolute water, we mentioned what was the conditions that absolute water becomes najis?
When
Let's say core water.
when it's impurity, smell, it changes color or it changes
Taste.
taste.
Taste, that's when it becomes najis. That's what's for core water, for example. But mudhaf water, as much as it is, meaning a water that's not absolute, okay? As much as it is, the moment a najis reaches it, the entire thing becomes najis. Now the Sayyid has an asterisk, inshallah we'll read it after we read the however. Can you read the however?
However, if it is poured from above onto an impure object, the amount that reaches the impure object becomes impure, while the amount that has not reached it, it remains pure. For example, if rose water is poured from a rose water container onto an impure hand, the amount that reaches the hand is impure, and the amount that has not reached it is pure.
So we mentioned, what was this? The law of isti'la, superiority. So when something pours from top to bottom, whatever it be, if that najasa is on the lower level, the higher level of that water does not become pure because it's not connected up, let's say downwise, it's only connected upwise. Okay? So for example, in the Middle East, see how they have these things that they pour rose water and people wash their hands with? They have these ibriq kind of jars, they pour rose water. If someone has a najis hand and then someone pours rose water on their hand, the entire jar doesn't become najis because it's from top to the bottom. That's the example that Sayyid mentions. Now back to the main point of the matter, which was as much as the amount of the mudhaf water, regardless of it being core or 100 core, the Sayyid has an asterisk. The Sayyid has basically a precaution. He mentions it in the asterisk. However, if the volume, we mentioned this in last week also, remember? Can you read the asterisk, please?
However, if the volume of the mixed water is extremely large, such as 1,000 core, so 384,000 liters, the impurity of all the mixed water through contact with a tiny amount of impurity is problematic. In observing precaution in this matter should not be neglected.
The Sayyid mentions a point that obviously 1,000 core is a huge amount of water, around 380,000 liters of water. The Sayyid says, if we want to say, according to the formula of purity, formula of purity, if we want to say that with the smallest amount of najasa reaching it, the whole thing becomes najis, it's hard for me to make that claim. I mentioned this, the point of title. The Sayyid says, it's hard for me to call the entire thing najis, even though it's mudhaf. It's hard for me to call it najis. Now, if something is problematic to be called najis, let's say we're not calling it najis, we're not calling it, najis yet. Does that mean, is it pure or not? The Sayyid says, be precautious. Be cautious here. Meaning, stay away from it. To be cautious here is to stay away from it. So don't do wuḍū with it and stay away from it. But when it comes to matters of, let's say if it touched 1,000 things, there is a chance that we could not call it najis because it's a huge sum of water. So, yep, is that clear, inshallah? Number 62.
Matter 62. If najis mudhaf water becomes mixed with flowing water or core water in such a way that it is no longer commonly orf called mudhaf water, it becomes pure.
Ahsantum. What was the condition of something becoming mudhaf? People don't call it water anymore. We said that. We said it's mixed to an extent that people don't commonly perceive it as water anymore. Now, if the same mudhaf water gets mixed with a core water or a flowing water, a huge amount of water, that people don't call that water mudhaf anymore. The same people that 2 weeks ago, they were calling it mudhaf, now we've mixed it to an amount that no one calls it mudhaf anymore. They call it pure water now. The same way that common perception made it pure, now common perception makes it, the other way.
Yeah.
The same way that common perception made it mudaf, now the same way the common perception makes it
Pure.
absolute. That was my mistake. Sorry. You had a question? So number 63.
Matter 63. Water that was absolute water, a mutlaq, and it is not known whether it has become mudaf water or not, is treated like absolute water, meaning it purifies impure things, and wudu and ghusl with it are valid.
It purifies impure things, and wudu and ghusl are valid. What is this law that we mentioned? Istishab. Remember? If there's absolute water and we don't know if it's mudaf yet or not, what do? We said, لا تنقض اليقين بالشك. You were certain that it was absolute. Now you're doubtful that it has become mudaf. The hadith says, don't care about the doubt. Remain on your certainty. So what's the water?
It's absolute.
Ahsantum. Now the opposite. The water that was mudaf.
Water that was mudaf water, and it is not known whether it has become absolute water or not, it is treated like mudaf water, meaning it does not purify impure things, and wudu and ghusl with it are not valid or invalid.
Ahsantum. So we were certain that it was mudaf. Now we have doubt that it has become absolute or not. What's the water?
It's
Mudaf.
mudaf.
Ahsantum. So we mentioned titles on Avan. Titles bring laws with themselves. So if the water is mudaf, no wudu is valid with it. If the water is absolute, wudu is valid with it. That's why the Sayyid is saying, meaning it does not purify impure things and all that. Okay. So these technicalities that like the equations of fiqh bringing, it's really technical sometimes. It's really precise sometimes. Number 64, please.
Matter 64. Water that is not known whether it is mutlaq or mudaf, and it is not known whether it was previously mutlaq or mudaf, does not purify an impure thing, and wudu and ghusl with it are invalid. If najasa reaches it even, based on obligatory precautions, if it is core or more, it becomes impure.
So now there's a water we don't know. We don't know if it's mutlaq or mudaf. And previously we didn't know if it was mutlaq or mudaf before. The Sayyid says it can't purify anything. It doesn't purify an impure thing. Because we said for something to become pure, I have to wash it with absolute water. Now, I want to illustrate how the Sayyid is drawing istishab here. This is istishab also, but it's about purifying, not the purifier. The subject of the istishab is the purifying action, not the purifier. So I have a, let's say, najis pencil, okay? And I have a water that I don't know if it's mudaf or mutlaq. Okay, ahsantu. So, absolute ahsantu. So now I take that water that I don't know what it is, and I wash this impure pencil with it. Am I certain that this has become pure? No, I'm still doubtful, because I don't know what I washed it with. So we do istishab on the purification of this. So I was certain that this was najis, but I'm not certain that it has become pure or not. I'm still doubtful about it. So I remain on my certainty that this was impure. You see the istishab where it applied? Not on the water, it applied on that thing that you want to purify. That's why they say it says it does not purify an impure thing, because it doesn't give us yaqeen. When you want to purify something, you have to become certain about it.
Relies on the original certainty.
If it has a previous state. Yes, ahsantum. Now the water doesn't have a previous state. We don't know anything about it. It's just a, let's say, a tub of water in the middle of the road, for example. Yes, and then they say it says if a najis thing touches it, out of ihtiyat, obligatory precautions, ihtiyat wajib, stay away from it. It becomes impure. Is that clear? Inshallah. 65.
Matter 65. Water that actually najasa, water that is actually najasa.
Water, I'll read the first piece.
Sorry.
Water that actual najasa, meaning ayna najasa, such as blood or urine reaches it and changes its smell, color, or taste, becomes impure. even if it is kor or jari. So we mentioned this, that the absolute law is whatever najis touches and it changes those conditions, the whole thing becomes najis, regardless of the water, even if it's kor or jari. In fact, if the smell, you want to read the rest?
Sure thing. In fact, if the smell, color, or taste of the water changes because of an impurity outside of it, for example, a dead animal besides the water changes its smell, that water, based on obligatory precaution, becomes impure, najis.
So in this secure scenario, the najis hasn't touched it. It's just next to it, in the vicinity of it. But the water has changed color because it was around it. And let's say the fumes of that water, of that najasa has caused it. This new virus that came about, the fumes of those impure things, I don't want to open it up. Hantavirus, did you guys hear about it? So that this shows Islam knows about these things far beyond. Even like we have a hadith that when you go, inshallah we'll read it, when you go to basically relieve yourself, it's mustahab to cover your nose, yes, your nose and breathing, and even your head. It's mustahab because of the fumes of the najasat. So Islam has it all planned out for us. So even if a najis is next to something, some water, and that impurity being in the vicinity of it has caused the smell, color, or taste to change, the water also becomes najis. Meaning change to the smell of that najasa, obviously. Not, for example, something else changes. Okay, so did we read 66?
Not yet.
No.
Matter 66, water into which actual najasa such as blood or urine has fallen and changes its smell, color, or taste, if it becomes connected to kor or jari water, or rain falls upon it, or the wind blows rain into it, or rainwater flows into it from a gutter while it's raining, then in all these cases, if the changes disappear, it becomes pure. However, the rainwater, cold water, or jari water must mix with it.
Now, that past scenario that we said, a water became najis, water, smell, taste changed. How do we purify it? We have to mix it with, let's say, core water or flowing or jari water to an extent that it completely mixes with it and the taste, smell, color that has changed goes away. Basically becomes like absolute water again. Because when smell, color, taste changes, it becomes mudhaf.
Yeah.
It becomes absolute again. So number 67. Number 67, please.
Matter 67. If an impure thing is purified in core or flowing water, then in the washing through which it becomes pure, the water that drips from it after removing the thing is pure. Likewise, if core, jari, or rainwater is poured onto an impure thing and purifies it, the water that drips from it after it becomes pure and after it is disconnected from the core, jari, or rainwater are pure.
Remember we spoke about ghusl. Does anyone remember what's ghusl? Ghusl. The ghusl. Ghusl najasat, for example. Anyone remember? We mentioned it, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So the water that leaves the thing that you're washing. So the Sayyid is saying, the water that leaves the thing you're washing, after the wash that it becomes pure, inshallah we'll mention the purifying orders, like what should be washed twice, what should be washed 3 times or once. The Sayyid mentions, after the wash, that meaning the number of washes. For example, if you have to wash it twice, after the second wash, which that thing becomes pure, the water leaving it also is pure. Is that clear? The water that drips from it after removing the thing is pure. Likewise also about the rest of the rainwater that's poured onto an impure thing and then purifies it. So the asterisks, we mentioned this. This is just saying we've mentioned the laws of the other things. Can you read number 68?
Matter 68. Water that was pure, tahir, and it is not known whether it has become impure or not, is pure. And water that was impure, najis, and it's not known whether it has become pure or not, remains impure.
Okay, now we just mentioned this 2 matters ago. Who can tell me what's this again? It's the Sahab. It's the Sahab again. So that was pure, and we don't know whether it has become impure or not, what do? We remain
We
on the certainty, purity.
certainty that it is absolute.
The pure,
Sorry, it is
yes,
pure.
yeah, same applies on that. You're right, but here we're talking about tahir and najis.
Yeah.
This law, this formula, let's call it the formula, the formula of istishab comes in a lot handy, and this is basically just the beginning. Hundreds more of matters are going to come, and you'll see how much it helps. It basically solves a lot, and it's a
Always rely on the
certainty.
original certainty.
Ahsant. Don't let the doubt ruin your certainty. Ahsant. So, now this was the end of the laws of water. Now, as you know, the most natural thing of a human is when they relieve themselves. And as we mentioned, the Risala always starts with the fact of purification and impurification. And this is a normal thing that when humans relieve themselves, there are laws for it. And there are obligations and there are things that are forbidden in that time. And inshallah, we'll be mentioning the obligatory matters and forbidden matters while someone is relieving themselves.
Obligatory and forbidden matters during relieving oneself. Matter 69. When relieving oneself and at other times, it is obligatory for a person to cover their private parts from those who are legally accountable, even if they are mahram relatives such as a sister or mother, and also from an insane person or child if they are discerning, meaning, for example, that they understand the impropriety of exposing private parts in front of others. However, a husband and wife do not need to cover their private parts from one another.
So the first obligation while one relieving themselves is they have to cover themselves. So if someone purposefully goes and uses a facility that does not cover themselves, like unfortunately we see these types of things that they relieve themselves while standing, that is haram for a Muslim to relieve themselves that way. So they have to be in an area that enclosed, covered. They cannot expose private parts to a person that's mukallaf. Basically public. And you would never do that in public. Yani if you're all alone in the desert, yes, that's something else. We're talking about when you encounter other people. Also, if it's a child or a person insane, that's we mentioned mumayyiz. What was the definition of discerning? One can tell wrong from right from wrong. And they understand, for example, like in this case, the say it says in this case, they understand one should not expose themselves. Like you see some childs, if they see something wrong, they turn their heads away. They have that understanding, that discerning factor within them. So, but husband and wife, that's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed for them to not cover themselves. So, can you please?
Matter 70. It is not necessary for a person to cover their private parts with a specific object. For example, covering them with the hand is sufficient.
This is just in the case if someone was in, let's say, al-tarar, in a state of urgency. Necessarily, if, let's say, God forbid, in some jails, we still unfortunately have the inhuman jails, they won't even give clothing to the inmates. So, or this existed even in the time of Ahlul Bayt, that in the jail of, what's his name? When he killed Bani Umayyah Buddar Iraq, Hajjaj. In the jails of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf la'natullah alayh, they say when he died, there were over 1,000 or I think 10,000 men and women from the Shia in his jails that did not have any clothing. So it was very inhumane. So in the state that someone has nothing to cover themselves, it's not necessary to have a clothing. The hands is enough if it can cover. So, number 71.
Matter 71. During relieving oneself based on obligatory precaution, the front of the body, that is the stomach and chest, must not be facing the Qibla or turned back from it.
So facing the Qibla, basically the Kaaba, or turning back the Kaaba. one cannot relieve themselves. Based on obligatory precaution, احتياط واجب, say it says, it's haram. It's a sin, يعني. So now the part that say it says the front of the body, this is a specific thing to it. So now in the next matter we'll explain what's so specific about the front of the body. So one, we'll mention it now. So I don't need to.
Matter 72. If while relieving oneself, the front of a person's body is facing the Qibla or turned away from it, but they turn their private parts away from
the awra.
The awra from away from the Qibla, it is not sufficient. Recommended precautions is that even when the front of the body is not facing or turned away from the Qibla, one should still avoid facing or turning the private parts towards the Qibla.
So if someone is facing the Qibla and then all of a sudden he remembers, just turning away that certain organ, private part from the Qibla is not enough. The whole body has to change. Okay? And now vice versa, if someone is not facing the Qibla and then accidentally or purposefully turns that part out of precaution, the Sayyid says it's recommended precaution, احتياط مستحب, that make sure that private part does not face the Qibla. So it's a sin to face the Qibla while relieving oneself. Unfortunately, in these toilets today, some people don't care actually, and we'll mention that if you don't know the Qibla, you cannot relieve yourself. 73, please.
Matter 73. Recommended precaution is that during istibara,
Istibra we'll mention inshallah later. It's a way that when someone does when they do number one, it's a really extremely mustahab thing for them to do to purify themselves, not only wash or dry. So inshallah we'll explain it at its own time. Recommend the precaution is at that time, and when purifying the outlet of urine or feces, the front of the body should not face or turn away from the Qibla. Turn away, we mean facing back. So even at that time, someone would say, I'm done. No, you're not done. Until the end of purification, one should not face or turn back to the Qibla. Now, the Sayyid says, in cases where a person knows that a small amount of urine remains in the passage and will come out through istibra, the precaution is stronger. Now, let's say you're actually done and you're doing istibra just for the ihtiyat or the mustahab, you shouldn't do it. Now, in the case that still you feel something's remaining, the precaution is much stronger even in that case. Okay? Did we read 74? No.
No, not yet. Matter 74. If in order to prevent someone, the individual mentioned in matter 69, from seeing them, a person is forced to sit facing the Qibla or with their back to it, then based on obligatory precaution, they must sit with their back to the Qibla.
So now, let's say, God forbid, someone is in an urgent state. Let's say you're in let's say in the jail or whatever. You're not in a free space, and you're forced to relieve yourself either facing or back to the Qibla. The Sayyid says, out of these two scenarios, back to the Qibla is better than facing. So this is in the case of urgency. There's no other way. So you see how Islam even mentions measures until the farthest point away from someone's mind. 75. And one thing, sorry, we mentioned here the people mentioned in number 6, matter 69. Who can remember? A mukallaf, or the discerning child, or even an insane person that understands the that one exposing themselves is inappropriate. It's also wajib one to cover themselves.
Matter 75. Recommended precaution is that a child should not be seated facing or turning away from the Qibla during relieving themselves.
Now let's say, does this law, these obligations, also apply on a child? Child that doesn't understand, not mumayyiz. We're talking about a child. Can they do it facing or turning back from the Qibla? The hadith, the hukm doesn't say it's haram. The hukm says it's mustahab, ihtiyat mustahab, to not even let a child do it. So, because it's really hard for a child to be controlled, you know. They wear nappies, they're running all around the house.
Matter 76. In places where the toilets have been built facing the Qibla or with it is back to the Qibla, whether intentionally, mistakenly, or due to ignorance from the ruling, based on obligatory precautions, one must sit in such a way while relieving oneself that they are neither facing nor turning away from the Qibla.
Meaning facing or back to the Qibla. So let's say if it's inconvenient, it's not a reason for someone to turn away from this obligation. So in any case, the toilet is in the wrong direction, whatever the reason be, one should observe this matter, that make sure they're not facing or turning their back to the Qibla. Let's say it says some people, some countries, the type of the, what do you call it, the
Orientation.
the toilet is in a way that if it's not properly, it's really hard. So they say it is, regardless of it, you have to make sure it's not facing the Qibla. It's really despised in Islam for someone to do that. It's haram. Did we read 76? Yes. No, 77.
Matter 77. If a mukallaf does not know the direction of the Qibla, then based on obligatory precautions, relieving oneself is not permissible for them, unless wading is not possible or wading causes extreme hardship that is normally unbearable or causes harm. This matter must also be observed on airplanes, trains, and ships.
Something that unfortunately people don't really care nowadays. I don't even know people know this hukm. So if I don't know the Qibla, if I don't know which way the Qibla is, meaning I'm not sure that the way, direction I'm relieving myself, is it the Qibla or not, it's not permissible for me to relieve myself. So it's haram. Unless, if it's not possible, let's say you're going to fall into trouble, you can't hold yourself, or it would cause extreme hardship, a hardship that's not bearable, or it could cause you harm. The doctor has said, whenever you feel like some people have some kidney issues, the moment something feeling happens, they have to relieve themselves. That's a different matter. But the fact that someone does not know the Qibla does not permit them to relieve themselves. So, and then on airplanes, trains, ships, you have to also know the Qibla and then relieve yourself. So unfortunately with airplanes, it makes a huge problem, but one has to observe. Can you read them?
Issue 78. Relieving oneself is forbidden in 4 places. Dead-end alleys, if the owner have not given permission, likewise public roads and pathways, if it causes harm to passerbys.
So in these 4 places, it's haram for one to relieve themselves. Number 1, in dead-end alleys, so like places that you can't go further, you know what's a dead-end obviously. So in a case that obviously dead-end alleys, it's usually private owned. This is doesn't happen in Australia, but in some other countries, it's owned by the people that live around it. So if they don't allow it, one can't relieve themselves there. And also in public roads, that would cause harm to the passerbys. Something that unfortunately we see nowadays, people, if you go to, I think it's in Netherlands, they actually have on the street, have you guys seen it?
Just clear glass thing?
No, it's actually just this, it's like, it's like a triangle, I think. 3 people would just on the road. Sorry? They'll stand and do their job. So shameful. Urinals, public urinal, on the street. And actually, I seen the video, I was so disgusted. And this is Europe, like the countries that claim to have modernism and whatever. This is them. La hawla wa la quwwata. Being like first world countries, Europe. I think it was Netherlands. Netherlands is like quite improved country, but still. So number 1, so in public roads, that would cause harm to the passerby. Number 2.
Property belonging to someone who has not given permission for relieving oneself there.
So if I'm at someone's house or on a land that's private land, I have to first seek permission, then. I can't just use someone's toilet without their permission. There has to be permission given. So dead-end alleys, or public pathways. Number 2, private properties without permission. Number 3,
A place endowed from a specific group of people, such as some schools.
so for example, inshallah, we're aware with the concept of waqf. Waqf is when someone owns something and then he makes the intention that, like this is about doing waqf or endowing something to a certain thing. This is waqf khas, they call it. So I have done waqf or waqf am, but specific for a specific group. Inshallah, in the laws of waqf, we'll mention it. That I've made a school, and then in my intention is that the toilets of this school can only be used by the students and people there. People, let's say, people involved in the school, teachers, people that work there. Can a parent go and use the facilities? No. So it's haram for one to relieve themselves in such a place. And you would see this matter in Islamic countries more. So in Australia, it doesn't really apply. Like if you go to let's say some private place without their permission, it's not allowed. So number 4, please.
On the graves of believers, if it is considered disrespectful towards them, in fact, even if it is not disrespectful, unless the land is from originally unrestricted public land,
Mubahat asliya.
Umahat asliya. Likewise, on any place where relieving oneself would cause disrespect towards one of the sacred matters of religion or mudhaf
Or madhab. So if one goes to a place that is the grave of someone, you got to be careful you're not in a place. So these are a few of them. These are parts that back in the days people would go in open lands and relieve themselves. And like graveyards didn't have certain things like today, signs, tombstones, not always. So if someone knows it's a grave of someone, they should not relieve themselves. Or if they go to a place that if they relieve themselves, it would cause disrespect to a religion. Let's say, unfortunately, I think this happened in Turkey, that they had gone to the graveyard of the Christians, some Sunnis, it was Muslims, and they had disrespected by defecating over there. This is haram in Islam. No one can disrespect someone's religion, especially by such a indecent act. So one cannot relieve themselves in these 4 places: dead-end alleys, properties, private properties, or a place that's worked for a specific group, or the grave of someone that would be disrespectful towards them to do so, specifically believers.